أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونستنصره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له إلها واحدا أحدا صمدا لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا ولم يكن له كفوا أحد وأشهد أن نبينا وعظيمنا محمدًا عبد الله ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وحبيبه اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد يقول جل جلاله في محكم التنزيل يا أيها الناس إن وعد الله حق فلا تغرنكم الحياة الدنيا ولا يغرنكم بالله الغرور إن الشيطان لكم عدو فاتخذوه عدوا إنما يدعو حزبه ليكونوا من أصحاب السعير. He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, O people, indeed the promise of your Lord is the truth. So do not be fooled by this worldly life that you live in. Do not be fooled by the one who goes out and seeks and hopes to fool you. Indeed, a shaitan is your true enemy. So take him as such. Exclusively, he will be calling those who follow him to a place of punishment. As we are approaching the 9-month anniversary of the beginning of these horrible events that we have been witnessing, we are also coming very close to the 3rd annual memory of the horrific events that occurred on South Carriage on June 6th. And between these two events, we must take a moment and zoom out for a second to reassess or to look at our status and look at this situation and reflect and contemplate as if we do not do that, if we as human beings and as Muslims specifically lack the ability to contemplate and reflect on what is happening throughout our lives, then we will not be able to make better choices. We won't make better decisions, and we will not grow or move forward. And this is a fatal human flaw where we describe history, meaning we narrate it as it occurs, but we lack the ability to actually take any of the lessons that are required for us to negate the possibility of these events happening again, or we lose our ability to actually learn from our mistakes. And the reason that I'm talking about this specifically today, and it's a PD day, and a lot of my younger brothers and sisters are here, so I want them to listen to this. The human race, unfortunately, has this need for an enemy. The human race, they require there being an enemy. It's a requirement that fulfills a sick part of our instincts, a part of us that is not healthy to feed, but it's there. If you give us an enemy, you give us some reason to hate. You give us a place for us to channel our hate and to channel our blame. And it's just something that is just a part of the human experience. And Islam is very specific on the fact that your enemy lies within. Like, your enemy is not someone that you can point at. Your enemy is one that you cannot see, you cannot taste, you cannot hear, you cannot touch. And your enemy is actually quite weak. All he really does is just give you bad thoughts, and then you're the one who either acts upon them or doesn't. Meaning, it brings it down. This is what the ayah says. Indeed, your enemy, shaitan, is your enemy. And since you cannot declare war on shaitan, as much as we like to declare war on things, you can't really declare war on shaitan. You can't see him, you can't do much, and he does not really harm you. Per se, directly, he doesn't really harm you. He just gives you bad thoughts. He tries to confuse you. He tries to show you things to be different than what they actually are. He tries to elude you, to misguide you. But at the end, it's your choice. It's you and it's me. We're the ones who make the final decision whether we are going to walk down a path of evil or not. The enemy that we seek out and we want so badly to fight is not materialistic, and it's mostly, whether we like it or not, ourselves. And this is what the Quran teaches us. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ. This surah that the Quran ends with, say, I seek refuge in the Lord of humanity, in the King of humanity, in the deity of humanity, min sharri al-waswas al-khannas, from the evil that is inflicted upon the one who whispers in darkness. الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس, the one who whispers into the hearts and the chests of human beings, min al-jinnati, from the jinn, wal nas, from human beings as well. And they can't harm you, but they can make you become harmful. But that's not the narrative that the West has picked up. And those who don't understand what Islam is about don't take that narrative. They need an enemy. For the longest time, it was communism. For the longest time, you weren't around, neither was I. You weren't here. They were the enemy. All you have to do is watch movies that were made back in the 70s. The enemy was always from a communist country. And then when communism fell, they needed another enemy. Fortunately, it turned out to be us. Unfortunately, the choice landed on the Muslims, not on the Arab. For people living in the West specifically, that's how it became. We became the enemy. We became the enemy whether we did something to deserve it or not. It's not even the point, but that's what we became. That's how we were viewed. And for the longest time, we were viewed like that. But then Muslims, because of the good, beautiful nature of what Islam is, Muslims moved. Muslims have always done that. Move from one place to the other. They immigrate, they go, they integrate. And then we lived amongst them. And it became much more difficult to call us the enemy when you were working with us, when you saw what the values that we stand for were. But that didn't change the general political outview of the establishment that we're a part of. It didn't change that, which puts us in this predicament. It puts us in this predicament that we find ourselves in, where we are a part of this country. We're a part of the North. of the North American culture. We're a part of Europe. We're a part of the West. We work in their schools and in their hospitals, and we run for office. And we're a part of the social fabric. However, they don't behave that way. However, 35,000 and counting are dead. Children and women, the majority of them, in their tents, they burnt in their tents, in refugee camps, where they're supposed to be. It's not even a place that's worth living in. You can't live there. There's nothing to live on. It's not life when you're stuck in a refugee camp. I've been to them. It's not life. You can't call that life. It's in limbo. You're just there hoping for one day being able to get out. There are people who live there for the majority of their lives. You can't call that life, and yet they're being followed there. So when we stand and we say, how is that acceptable? When we voice our concerns, why is this okay? Why are we still supporting someone who is doing that? Why is that not being stopped? They have no answer for us because we are continuously being seen as the enemy, at least overseas. And that has to change. This is something that we can talk about. The hatred that fueled the events of June 6 is the same hatred that's fueling the events in Gaza and Rafah. The same hatred. And the indifference that allowed someone to generate all that hate that led to June 6, that indifference, that political and social indifference that allowed that to be built up to and lead to the June 6 events is the same indifference that's allowing what's happening in Rafah to happen right now. As I speak to you, they are pulling children and women under rubble. They are pulling them from the refugee camps and they're taking them to hospitals that have no doctors and have no supplies. In real time, I could literally get on this mimbar and put down that projector and just turn on one of the live feeds. I could turn on live feed and show you what's happening in a place where Muslims are trying just to live. And then we ask ourselves that question, why is that okay? How is this okay? Why aren't the leaders that represent us saying something about this? We pay our taxes, we vote them in, we seem to be a part of this community. Why is this? We're telling them this is not okay. We're telling them this is unjust. It's the reason that I explained to you. This is my theory of it. I believe that the West still needs an enemy. The West has not matured enough to the point where they can understand that you don't need an enemy. You don't need an enemy to run a successful country or a successful business or a successful population. You don't need an enemy. But they feel like they do. They continue to use us as enemies. They continue to use this narrative. And that is a fact. It's a fact that you find through media outlets, you find it in the news, you find it in movies, you find it everywhere. And we have become numb to it. We've accepted it. To a certain degree, many of us you just ignore it. We just don't watch these outlets. We're just not a part of that whole group of people, but it's there. It's there, and it's the reason why what's occurring continues to occur. And the question that I want to pose for you today is, are we capable of changing that public opinion about Muslims and Islam? And do we care to change it to begin with? Do we care to change that to begin with? Does it matter to us? Do we want to change it? And should we change it? And I've heard and I've asked and I posed this question in different places to listen to people's answers, and unfortunately it's not a united one. It's not a united answer. Not everyone thinks that it's worthwhile to change that narrative. Not everyone feels that we should be putting any energy into changing that narrative. And I argue that that's not correct. No, there's more than one reason to want to change that narrative. There's more than one reason to want to care about how people view this deen. Not just because of the injustices that are occurring, but because we are ambassadors of the final word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are ambassadors of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. We carry his legacy. His legacy was for this word that you see on the shelf and for his way of life to be carried as far as possible to every human being. That is what we are obligated with. We are commanded to do that. We are commanded to make sure that we represent Islam appropriately and that we carry Islam to others so they can learn it, so they can embrace it. And if we don't do it correctly, then we are obligated to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to do it well. With that will come the removal of certain injustices for sure. With that, you will be able to change the public opinion to the point where you can actually affect an injustice that's happening. But we have to ask ourselves this question: is this something that we're investing time and energy in, or are we not? And I have to tell you that within the last couple of weeks, and I'm saying this because it's a PD day, and a lot of high school students are here, school students are here. Listen, wallahi, the effect that university students have had on public opinion has been astonishing over the last couple of weeks. Has been astonishing. You don't understand the power that you carry as someone who is young. You think because you're told by people like me that, you to sit and to be quiet and to listen, and that you amount to way more than you'll ever fully understand. And you'll only understand it when you're at my age. Understand the power that you carry as a student, as someone who's young, who's passionate, who's compassionate, who has the energy and the time, and can afford to actually put themselves in a position where they demand change. You see, when I demand change, some people look at me with it. There's always going to be a suspicious eye. Why am I demanding change? I've been around a long time. There may be a catch to it. There's going to be a catch somewhere. I must have some other agenda. But when you demand change, when at your age you decide that this is wrong, I refuse injustice, I refuse dhulm, I refuse people to be treated like this, and you voice it out, there's no accusation of you doing it for an agenda because you're coming from a pure position. You're coming from something that is pure, that is real. So brothers and sisters, understand that as a high school student, as a university student, you carry weight. Throw it around a little bit. Throw it around a bit and speak your mind and influence because when you influence the public opinion, you give us the ability to actually start shifting the narrative a little bit. We have to shift this narrative that exists outside of masajid, that we are not always exposed to. Those of you who work in certain places know that's there. Those of you who work know what the narrative of Muslims actually is amongst the general population. If you're working in the right place, you know what it is. You've heard it before. That has to change. We are obligated to work towards changing that. We have to. And we have to care how people view us. Don't compromise anything. No, I'm telling you the opposite. You change the narrative against Muslims by being truly Muslim, by following the exact words of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Not the opposite. Not by selling out on something. Not by leaving something behind. Not at all. But this is something worthy of our attention. If we see what happened on June 6th 3 years ago, changed this city forever. It changed me forever. I don't see the world before it and after. I know COVID, made more of a splash, but honestly, that day is a day that I will never forget. I will be on my deathbed and I'll remember where I was when I heard the news, when Muhammad Hamu sent me the message saying, did you see what happened? I was in University Hospital. I was on the 3rd floor, and I was sitting in the Team 2 room because I was on call. I was sitting there with my staff, and I looked at it, and I read it, and I could not believe what I saw because I knew these people, because this is our city, because we're a part of this place. Because that's not behavior that we tolerate. We don't call for that. We don't accept it. We don't accept that degree of hatred, that degree of discrimination. It's completely unacceptable. We don't accept it from our own. We don't accept it from others either. And it put us in a position where we felt threatened, where my wife wouldn't go out and walk alone for a couple of months afterwards, where people were scared. Imagine the people in 6th and Rafah. Imagine hearing these numbers. 35 and 36 and 37,000 people dead. I'm not even talking about the ones who are wounded and disabled beyond repair. The trauma that's going to come out of this place. How is this not important? How is the world sitting around and discussing this as if it's a tertiary or secondary issue, as it is a complex situation? It's not a complex situation. It isn't. Now, we can be frustrated about that as much as we want, and I can get upset here on the member because of that being the case, but maybe we step back for a moment and wonder, well, how can that change? Because that's what matters. That's what matters. At the end, we're all going to age and die, but then the younger generation is going to have to deal with whatever we leave them. Whatever world we leave them is what they're going to have to deal with. How do we make sure that when they grow up, they have a better future, and they can speak better, they can represent themselves better, and that this doesn't happen again, and that they're equipped appropriately to do so? That is our obligation, brothers and sisters. There's nothing else here to do aside from that. You are outside of any true dictatorship. You're not being oppressed right now. You understand how valuable that is. You live in safety and you have enough food on your table. Those are the only two blessings that you get to complain about. You can't complain about anything else. If you have those two things, then your complaints, you shelf them. Do them alone at night in sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not of them. And then you focus on your role. What is your role here as someone who has safety and has provision, aside from making sure that the world is different when you walk away from it, when you leave it, and you teach your kid to have the same mentality, that he grows up also looking at the world critically and taking stands that make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala satisfied with them, stands that can be proud of justice, of righteousness, of fairness, of tolerance, of truth. And if we're not focused on that, if we're not completely and fully focused on that, then I don't know what we're doing. I don't understand what we're spending our time doing. I believe that anything else is a complete waste of breath, a waste of oxygen, to be around not focused on what we're here to do, what we're here to try to achieve. It may seem far-fetched, and it may actually be far-fetched, but it's not more far-fetched than the man who stood on Jabal al-Safa and called his people and was rejected by his own family members with less than 50 people across the world that listened to him, alayhi salatu wasalam. It's not more far-fetched than that. Of him standing on a small mountain somewhere in the middle of nowhere, of the desert, with less than 50 people that supported him. Most of them were slaves. He speaks to his family who reject him. His own uncle curses him out. And he was told that this message has to reach every corner of the earth. That is your responsibility. More far-fetched than that? No. There's 2 billion of us. We don't need all 2 billion, honestly, even though we hope that all of them turn a corner at some point in their lives. May Allah guide us all. Allahumma ameen. We just need a few pure hearts, a few pure souls and spirits, those who are willing to see reality for what it is and make a decision in their lives that help them grow. The Prophet ﷺ, he cared about these. He cared about how people saw him. He cared about the message that he carried. There's a known story in Bukhari, and this first part of the khutbah with it for you to listen to. ﷺ was harmed by Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul more than any living human being. No one even came close. They thought Abu Jahl and Uqba were bad. They didn't see this guy. This guy came in guns blazing. He did everything possible to try and end Islam and kill the Prophet ﷺ time and time again. He went after his reputation, after his family, after his wealth, after his companions, after his status, after everything. He tried time and time again to end it. And the Prophet ﷺ tolerated him. And one day, on the way back from a battle, he says something so rude that I will not even repeat on this minbar, out of respect for the Prophet ﷺ. He said something so rude, and he did something that was harmful. And he withheld food and water from people who were starving, from army members who were starving, Muslims the whole journey turned out to be 4 times longer than they had prepared for, so people were on a tight budget. And he had a little bit extra and he refused to share. So the Sahaba got upset. Umar got upset specifically. فقال يا رسول الله, the hadith in Bukhari, قال يا رسول الله دعني أضرب عنق هذا المنافق. Let me give me his neck, يا رسول الله. فقال ما يا عمر. He said, be quiet, Umar. لا يقول الناس محمد يقتل أصحابه. People will never say that Muhammad killed one of his own companions. People will never say that I harmed someone who was with me. Whether they were with me truly or they were with me superficially, but deep down inside they didn't care. If on paper he's with me, people will never say that I harmed one of them. He will live with us for as long as he wants. He's with us. نحسن صحبته ما بقي معنا. Hadith Imam Ahmad. I will be the best companion to him for as long as he's with us. He cared about these things. He cared to take care of those who weren't functional. And he cared also of how Islam was going to be seen. Do you understand that all it would have taken is one slip from him, for this whole thing to end, for this whole story not to exist, for this microphone and me to disappear, for it to fade away, if you just go back and make a mistake. It's in Surah Al-Qalam, the second or the third surah that was revealed to him, one of the earliest, or one of the first 5. At the end of it, وَإِن يَكَادُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ لَمَّا سَمِعُوا الذِّكْرَ. And لَيُزْلِقُونَك, zalq is to slip, but not to slip literally, to slip figuratively, like to make a mistake, to do something wrong. The disbelievers are looking at you, and they are so angry, and they're so upset, and they're so jealous and envious that they, with their eyes, are almost forcing you to slip. Like they're using their eyesight to try and get you to slip. They just want you to make one mistake. Just make a mistake so that we can go around and say, this is what he is. This is what he did. He stole, he lied, he mistreated, he oppressed, he something, just do something. وَإِن يَكَادُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ. They're almost getting you to slip with their eyes, That's how angry they were. But he never did. So what did they say? وَيَقُولُونَ إِنَّهُ لَمَجْنُونَ. So they said he's mad. Mad is not a sin. Madness is not a sin, right? Insanity is not a sin, but that's all they could come up with because they couldn't find something on him. They couldn't find something on him. عليه الصلاة والسلام. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه يغفر لكم يا فوز المستغفرين استغفروا. الحمد لله وحده وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على من لا نبي بعده وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اتبع نهجه ووفى عهده. إخواني وأخواتي، بين غزة ورفح وبين السادس من حزيران نقف كمسلمين في هذا المجتمع وفي غير هذا المجتمع، نتأمل حالنا اليوم كمسلمين ونتساءل لماذا يحدث ما يحدث، ولماذا يقع علينا ما يقع علينا من ظلم ومن إساءة ومن تنديد واستبداد. ويجبر العاقل إذا نظر إلى هذه المسألة نظرة متدبر ومتأمل أن يقع على بعض الحقائق. الغرب يا أخواني يحتاج إلى عدو، وقد جعلنا عدوا له، وكمسلمين نرفض أن يكون البشر أعداء لنا، فإنما عدونا الشيطان، وعدونا هذه النفس التي بين جنبينا التي إذا لم نربها ونزكها أمرتنا بالسوء وقادتنا إلى ما لا يحمد عقباه. لكنهم هكذا يصنعون. وإذا أردنا أن نرى مستقبلا مختلفا لهؤلاء الشباب الذين هم بين أيدينا اليوم، الذين أتوا معكم والمدارس مغلقة، إذا أردت لابنك هذا ولابنتك هذه أن يكون لهم مستقبل مختلف عن الواقع الذي نعيشه، فاعلم أن الرأي العام المسلمين يجب أن يتغير، والتغير ليس فقط من أجل أن يكون المستقبل مشرقا، لا، وإنما التغير يجب أن يحصل لأننا نحمل شعار الإسلام، لأننا نحمل رسالة الله في كتابه وفي سنة نبيه عليه الصلاة والسلام إلى البشر. نحن نحمل الإسلام، هذا ما حملناه من قبل الله سبحانه وتعالى، فهذا واجب من واجباتنا أن نحمل الدين إلى الناس، فإن فشلنا سئلنا عن ذلك يوم القيامة. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حمل إنا سنلقي عليك قولا ثقيلا، كان هذا القول الثقيل أن أوصل كلام الله إلى الناس في جميع بقاع الأرض، في كل بيت من شعر ووبر ومدر، الكل يجب أن يصل إليه الإسلام، وقد قدم عليه الصلاة والسلام ما عليه، وبقي علينا أن نقدم ما عندنا. فتغيير هذه النظرة وتغيير هذه الرواية وتغيير هذا الخطاب هذا من جزء من واجباتنا كمسلمين اليوم. I'm going to end this khutbah with this thought that I want to share with you. If you understand what I'm trying to explain today, if you understand that's what's occurring overseas and what occurred here, it comes from the same problem. The same problem that I don't think we've spent enough time trying to fix, trying to deal with. There is a front line, there's a front of fixing that comes back to the political aspect of our existence as Muslims in the West and back home, and the organizational back, and I understand that. And I'm not here to talk about that piece because of the lack of my ability to do so. But there's another aspect of this, which is the aspect of education, the aspect of advocacy, the aspect of the narrative about us, that we do have the ability to actually steer, we have the ability to affect and change. And that comes through the 5 points that I made around 2 years ago. And I pointed out that for this community, there are 5 basic objectives that we have to spend our time trying to work on. We have to work on education. Make sure that this younger generation knows what it is that they stand for. Make sure they understand Islam as Islam should be understood. Not maybe as the way you were taught it, but as it is, not as you would like it to be. Make sure they know, because if they know, if you have knowledge, then ignorance has no way in. And when ignorance has no way in, you're immune. They have to know, and they'll have identity if they do. You have to invest in mentorship to make sure that they have role models, people in front of them that are doing the work that they can learn from.
Right now, we're not doing a very good job at that. Aside from a few programs, which is not what my actual goal of mentorship. What I mean by mentorship is that you step up and then make sure the person behind you is watching so they can learn to step up like you. If you're not stepping up, they have no one to mentor them. How are they going to step up? How are they going to make decisions if they have no one ahead of them doing it properly? Mentorship means that you have to actually rise to the occasion so you can teach those behind you to rise to the occasion too. Outreach, we have to put in more effort in actually reaching out with Islam to those who don't have it. This has to be one of our goals, has to be one of our objectives as a community. We carry this responsibility on the Day of Judgment in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we are putting no effort into spreading Islam to those who don't have it, then we're going to be asked about that. We have to make sure that we have some degree of financial stability. We have to have some degree of financial stability within our community so that we can actually fund the work that needs to be done. And then 5, and I leave it till the end because I think today is the most important one. I think all of them lead up to it, is advocacy, where we advocate for righteousness and for justice. We advocate for our rights and we advocate for khair, for goodness. We advocate for that which is helpful. We advocate for those who don't have a voice. Those who don't have a voice, they need someone to be their voice for them. That's a pretty good reason to be alive. It's a pretty good cause to live for, where you are the voice of those who have no one to speak for them, who have been forgotten. The thousands of names that have been forgotten, they died they died in the darkness quietly. Died in the darkness quietly with not much of a stirring of any sort. Not much noise was made for them. They just were forgotten. You know, the poor families, the families from very low socioeconomic backgrounds, the ones who are just, you know who I'm talking about, you've been to the Middle East, and you don't need to be there, you can be here. You know, the da'if, the weak who just are barely making it. Then they die altogether. And they're buried with nothing to recognize their names, and they're forgotten as if they didn't matter. Be the voice of that person. Make sure that their blood and their life was not in vain. Make sure that they don't disappear into nothingness because we were too selfish and too self-occupied to care about it. As younger brothers and sisters, you need to wake up earlier than maybe you would have had to. Sometimes history requires you to wake up and mature a little bit earlier than your time. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Ali had to do it. At 10 years old, he had to make that decision, and so did Zubayr, and so did Talha. These great names of our Islamic history, they had to grow up really quickly. They had to start picking up some of the burden and carrying some of the responsibility at 10, 11, and 12. So don't tell me you're too young. Don't tell me that you don't have the ability. You do. You just have to realize certain things that maybe I can tell you people in their 50s and 60s have failed to realize, but you could. And if you do, then you'll live a life that is different. And if you live a life that is different, then the outcome, 30 or 40 years from today will be very different as well. And a sheikh can get on the minbar and speak the positives and celebrate the achievements and talk about the great things that are occurring instead of getting here every week and talking about failures and shortcomings and pain instead of talking about pain all the time. At some point, it becomes hard to continuously talk about pain. This has been the hardest 9 months of giving khutbahs in my life. I almost wish that I didn't even start this place so I didn't have to give the khutbahs during this time and just open it after this is over. It's hard to get up and talk about pain every single week. It's hard for you to hear it. It's hard for me to talk about it. I can't ignore it. I can't get up here and talk about something different. I can't ignore what's happening. It's nice. I'm tempted to every week. I'm tempted to get up here and maybe we'll talk about Hajj. Hajj is coming down. Talk about all the nice parts of Hajj. It's easier for me. It's uplifting. We can walk away feeling a little bit of a spiritual high, but it's not the right way to do it. There's pain and there's oppression, and we have to talk about them until they are removed or until we have a plan to remove them, and then we can focus on the plan, and we don't even have a plan yet. We don't even have a plan yet. This has to change. This is what has to change. This is what needs to change. Wallahi, this is what needs to change. What needs to change is that. Is our indifference. Is our indifference and our lack of plan and our lack of direction. That's what has to change. If we change that, I can guarantee you things will be different. And the younger generation will feel much more proud to be Muslim, much more energetic and energized to be Muslim. They'll want to come to the masjid. They'll want to learn. They'll want to stand for something that is meaningful. They'll want to do it. You won't have the problem of please come تعال يا ابني ومشان الله وافتح القرآن واقرأ. Don't be like that and be different and put down the phone and stop following Mr. Beast and listen to the Sheikh what he's talking about. It'll be easier because it's meaningful. People who have no causes to live for, have nothing meaningful in their life, they resort to nothingness. They resort to something that's meaningless. They resort to play and games because there's no reason to be serious. There's no reason to mature. There's no reason to actually change. But we do have that opportunity today. A little bit of awareness amongst our older generation, a little bit of awareness amongst our younger generation, and you can make something very special, almost magical happen. Wallahi, to me, the magical part of the seerah is the younger people. When you read their stories, to me, it's like magic. I don't understand it. I don't understand because I remember being 10, 11, 12. I don't understand it. I don't understand how they were that way. How someone could be that young. How an 11-year-old can come up to Abdul Rahman ibn Auf during the Battle of Badr and tell him, where's Abu Jahl? He's like, what do you want, Abu Jahl? He said, I was told he used to harm the Prophet ﷺ. I was told not to come home today before I take him out. He was so young that he had tied his sword around his arm because he couldn't carry it properly. He couldn't carry it. It was too heavy for him, so he had it tied on his arm. Yeah. A degree of passion and a degree of commitment like that is magical. It's magical. I hope that was a benefit to you. واعلموا أن الله أمرنا بأمر عظيم فقال إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد وارض اللهم عن الأربعة الخلفاء السادة الحنفاء أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي وارض اللهم عن أزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وعن آله الطيبين الطاهرين وعن صحابته الغر الميامين وعن التابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعنا معهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات اللهم فرج هموم المهمومين ونفس كروب المكروبين وارفع الغم عن المغمومين وارفع الظلم عن المظلومين واحقن دماءنا ودماء المسلمين اللهم فرج عن إخواننا المستضعفين في كل مكان فرج عنهم في غزة والسودان وفي جميع بقاع الأرض يا رب العالمين اللهم اكفهم شر العدا اللهم اكفهم شر العدا اللهم عليك بأعدائهم فإنهم لا يعجزونك اللهم رد المسجد الأقصى إلى رحاب المسلمين اللهم أخرج الصهاينة من أرض فلسطين اللهم ردنا أجمعين إليك وإلى دينك وشرعك وسنة نبيك ردا جميلا اللهم تب علينا من جميع ذنوبنا توبة نصوحا طهرنا بها قلبا وجسدا وروحا وما ذلك عليك اللهم بعزيز ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون